What's up guys? Today I'm dressed like a Cheeto, and today we're also going to be talking about tonight's game from the LA Lakers and the Phoenix Suns. This was an incredibly telling game for both teams, and I think especially for the Lakers, we saw some pretty good but also some pretty bad things with that. Without any further ado, let's get into today's game because this one had some huge implications for both teams. Naturally, we can't talk about the Lakers without first mentioning Russell Westbrook, especially with how poor of a game that he had starting off last time. He did put up a little bit of a better performance today. Ultimately, I think the Lakers actually did use him a little better too, if we look at how he was, especially in the first and the fourth quarters. In the first quarter, he had a pretty solid start. He was hitting some jumpers. The Lakers were actively using him in the offense and having LeBron and AD play more of an off role, kind of suiting to Westbrook's strength. I actually think we saw some potential of this working, especially with how fast of a start that the Lakers got out to. Westbrook was hitting some good jumpers. He was posting up, playing some albeit physical but good defense. Then in the second quarter, he's just kind of started going off. He started taking some heat checks, and if you're Russell Westbrook, you don't really take heat checks, and he was taking some weird ones, like some deep mids, a few like contested threes, especially early in the shot clock. Like, it's just not shots that you really want Russell Westbrook to ever take. But ultimately, if I'm a Lakers fan, I'm a little more happy with how Westbrook played. I think he had like somewhere around 15, 5 and 5. It wasn't the greatest performance. It's not what we're expecting with Westbrook. But we also know that Westbrook also has a tendency to not always start out fast right away on a team. If you look at how he was on the Rockets and the Wizards, it took Russell Westbrook almost half a year to really hit his full stride. And I think today we kind of saw a few baby steps towards that. But it does really make me wonder if this connection is going to work, especially with the way that the Lakers have their current lineup set. Can somebody please tell me why DeAndre Jordan is on this team? He played for like 10 minutes, only had like 1 point and 4 rebounds. He was there to do the jump ball, play a few minutes in the first quarter where he wasn't really that aggressive, and then that's about it. I just don't really get what he's doing there. I know DeAndre Jordan doesn't have the biggest contract in the world, and he just doesn't have the biggest role on the team, but I'm just wondering why he's really there. The Lakers are playing Anthony Davis at center a lot more, and I think it's working out pretty well for them, albeit DeAndre did slow him down a bit, or at least hold him to a more inefficient game. But Davis played a lot of center in today's game, and that was a pretty good thing. I think part of that has to be with Russell Westbrook being a good physical force and adding in some rebounds to kind of take some of that pressure off of Anthony Davis. That's probably the favorite thing that I saw from the Lakers today, is seeing Davis at the 5, Russell Westbrook at the 1. They obviously at some points had a really good combo going, especially towards the fourth quarter with the Lakers were making a push. But one big issue that we love to talk about the Lakers is their lack of spacing. You look at guys like Howard, you look at guys like, I wouldn't really say Davis is a floor spacer. If you look at guys like Jordan, LeBron for most of his career, albeit he's been an average, sometimes above average 3-point shooter, but I would never really call him a floor spacer, mostly just because he's always the one with the ball. We look at guys like Rajon Rondo, Avery Bradley, sometimes he can be hit or miss. We look at guys like these, and I kind of think that the Lakers don't really have too much spacing, or sometimes they just have way too many guys who can't shoot at the same time. And suddenly LeBron James has turned into one of the best shooters in the league. First game of the season against the Warriors, he had 5 threes. This season, or this game against the Sun, he had like 5 threes on I think 9 attempts, something like that. He has been shooting absolutely amazing from downtown, and these aren't just catch and shoot threes, these aren't just corner threes. We're talking about he's going around screens, he's coming off of a pick and roll, he's pulling up, he's shooting deep beyond the arc. This isn't really something that they talk about. He's shooting a few feet beyond the arc, and he's able to get some shots. Mikal Bridges was the one guarding LeBron for a lot of the game. Bridges was having to step past the arc to guard LeBron James. If you were standing outside of the 3-point line to guard LeBron James, just a few dribbles and James gets around you and there's nobody who's stopping him. But James' shooting has been absolutely amazing. I know it's a small sample size, but he's shooting near 50% while making like 10 3-pointers on the year already. If this is anything for what he's like to come, James is gonna be a legitimate floor spacer and a legitimate threat, which can really open up the Lakers offense. And at least to start off the game, James actually also had some pretty good back downs. He was able to switch off of Bridges. Bridges did a great job of slowing him down, but we're definitely going to talk about Mikal later. But in the beginning of the game, LeBron James had no trouble getting to the post. He was hitting some deep fades on nearly everybody who got switched onto him. Once again, same thing we saw against the Warriors. This could be huge for the development and the longevity of LeBron James. If he can be as lethal as a shooter as he's been in the first few games, his season might be even crazier than we've seen before. Even though LeBron is putting up some crazy numbers shooting, he didn't dominate because Mikal Bridges did an amazing job on him. Nearly every time LeBron shot the ball, Bridges was there with a contest, especially a lot towards the second half where we didn't really see LeBron thrive as much as he was doing. But we also saw LeBron get a little bit frustrated. The Phoenix Suns were playing some of the best defense and some of the best rotations that I've ever seen. They had quite a few mismatches where they had a guard matched onto Anthony Davis or a guard like Cameron Payne matched onto LeBron. And obviously he passes out of the double team to try and get the open man. And right when the ball gets to an open man, there's a Suns player there. The helper, they get all that going. They're having some amazing rotations and generally frustrating the Lakers. We didn't really get to see LeBron do those skip passes and those post passes that we all know he's so good at. Some of the best defense I've seen, I think something that's really going to be strong about this Phoenix team is they have a lot of guys returning from last year. This game showed that they have a lot of chemistry, both on offense and defense. Some perfect rotations, just some perfect play calls on both sides. I was really impressed where my jaw had dropped a few times watching these just because of how well the Suns were rotating. And ultimately, I think that was a big reason why they were able to win the game and hold off the Lakers for as long as they did. But not only did Bridges do that on the defensive side of things, but he killed on the offensive side. I think he went like 7 of 11, 8 of 11, something like that in this game. He had a few big threes. He had like 21, 22 points. I would argue he was the second best player for Phoenix tonight. He was playing some amazing defense, and then offensively, he was cutting at the perfect time. He was finishing at the rim well. Of course, he was being a great three-point shooter, but he was also creating his own shot a few times, something that we haven't really seen Bridges do too often. I think he has good potential for this. We don't really often see Mikal Bridges create his own shot. Usually it's coming off of a Booker or a Paul pass. There was one play I think about halfway through like the second quarter where Bridges beat his man off the dribble and then he like pulled up from the free throw line as time expired, and I was really shocked to see someone like Mikal Bridges because we don't really too often look at his shot. Most of his offense kind of comes off of the off ball. But at least with these first 2 games of the season, Bridges is showing some huge promise for growing both as an offensive and defensive player. He recently got a bigger contract that some people were pretty kind of controversial about, especially with DeAndre Ayton still not getting paid. But I'm predicting right now that I think that contract's going to be a steal soon. I think Bridges is going to show some serious improvement this year, and I think he might be a huge catalyst for the Suns offense. But speaking of the catalyst of the Suns offense, we have to talk about how well Chris Paul played today. Chris Paul had 23 points, he had 14 assists, and going 50% from the field while 10 of 10 from the line. He was doing every single thing you would expect out of the point guard, playing good defense, being the leader, running the offense through assists or the hockey assists. It was absolutely amazing. To his age now, he's like, what, 37, 38 years old, something like that? I didn't really expect Paul to be doing as good as he kind of did there. I think he definitely has a lot more in the tank, and he kind of has some of that ageless play that I think is going to continue to make him a relevant point guard. I doubt he's ever going to win it, but nights like these, once again, that's why he's going to be in 4th, 5th place, because the dude wins games, he gets a good plus minus, and if he's on the court, your team's generally going to do good. Let's see, 2 other players that I have notes for, let's talk about. Devin Booker. Booker kind of scared me. He kind of had a bit of a slow start. It's tough to say if it's just the new season. Booker is also coming off of a COVID diagnosis, so we don't know if that is affecting him deeper, but Devin Booker was definitely, he just couldn't get his shots to go for majority of the game. It wasn't until about midway through the 3rd quarter where I think he had like an 8 or 10 point explosion. Of course, he was still making some good passes, and his defense was, I would say it was all right, nothing to complain about, but really, generally his shot just was not falling for the first half of the game, and honestly, this game probably wouldn't have even been close if it weren't for how Bridges and Paul were playing. But Booker, probably being one of the most streaky players in the league, after having such a poor start, he kind of had like a little unstoppable Kobe moment. That's kind of how he has a pretty decent looking box score, but he definitely was not his full self for the first, I'd say, 24 minutes of the game, somewhere around that mark, but it's still early in the season. I'm not too concerned about it. I think he's going to find his rhythm, and I think he just kind of has to shake off some of that off-season and that COVID rust. Finally, last player to talk about the Suns was JaVale McGee. McGee only put in like 13 minutes, it looks like, but he had like 9 points, 4 assists, some good hustle plays. There was that one play where he like cherry picked after the Lakers scored and the Suns got 2 points right back. McGee was like the perfect backup center out there. He was practically working as a spark off the bench, something I never thought that I would actually say about McGee. but he seemed to have great energy going with guys like Booker and Paul, and really he was just looking like the perfect backup point guard out there, and he was definitely making the Lakers pay a bit. Let's talk about the other Suns center, DeAndre Ayton. He had a few plays that was kind of concerning. He put up 8 points, 14 rebounds, going like 4 of 10 from the field. Not exactly the greatest game. He had some good, like I said, good rebounding, and he also played pretty solid on defense, especially against Davis. But he also had a few plays that kind of concerned. There was a moment where he got switched on to Russell Westbrook and basically had a chance to tackle him at the hoop. This was about halfway through the third quarter. And instead of taking on Russell Westbrook, someone who's almost 8 inches shorter than him, he decided to try and kick it out to Mikal Bridges, where the ball was spotted away by Rajon Rondo. Not taking advantage of that when you're a physical beast like Ayton, that's kind of concerning. You don't really want to see him be that timid. And there was another play early in the first quarter where he was matched up or got switched on to Rajon Rondo. They were basically right below the hoop, and instead of just bodying Rondo and trying to rise up and either slam over him or get the foul, he faded away on a hook shot. If you're DeAndre Ayton, why are you fading away on a hook shot when a guy who's half your size and is a foot less than you? That is kind of concerning to see. I don't really like him passing out or not attacking guys who are literally half of his size. That's something that's kind of concerning. I'm saying this as someone who thinks that Ayton should have the max, but yeah, that is not a good sign and not something that we really want to see out of Ayton. He threw down some lobs and he did have some good scoring down low, and he actually got, I think it was 1 or 2 really nice buckets against Anthony Davis, but he could have easily had more than 8 points today if he really would have attacked a bit more. But one guy who did have a lot of good points today was Carmelo Anthony. He was a perfect guy coming off the bench. He had I think he had a few post plays. He had a few good catch and shoot threes, some like long twos. Really just having that overall kind of Carmelo Anthony-like game. I really like seeing it. It's a fun game to watch. It was a huge spark off the bench. Carmelo Anthony is obviously loved by the Lakers. He practically gets a standing ovation every time he steps onto the floor. I'm happy to see that. I honestly hope that he doesn't really start. I think he's better coming off the bench, and he's better in that 6-man role. Put him around some backup role players on the bench, and I think he can be a pretty solid guy for you. Do what the Spurs did with Manu Ginobili and obviously have him be your 6th man, but still put him in the final minutes. And I think you're going to be pretty well set. There was a lineup towards the end of the game. The Lakers had Davis at center, Carmelo, LeBron, Westbrook, and someone else. I can't remember who. But those are 4 good guys. They're pretty athletic. They're pretty long. They can all score really well. They can space out the floor. It's a tough lineup to guard. Obviously, you can't run it the whole time because it spreads your team out too much. But when you have all those guys going, that's when you really saw how good this Lakers team can be. But that isn't the Lakers team that we saw. There were 2 things that were a little concerning. The first one was this thing that we saw between Howard and Davis. Obviously, we don't know what the full event was about. I think it was obviously with Dwight Howard not getting onto the top 75 team. I'm just kidding about that, but he definitely should have been. I can't believe how he got left out. But anyways, it was a rough game. The referees were making some questionable calls. Even as a Suns fan, I can say that. And it was a pretty fired up environment against the rival. But it was also kind of unacceptable, especially for 2 veterans like that. Hopefully this isn't a sign of kind of systematic things within the Lakers. We also kind of have to acknowledge the Lakers have a lot of guys and just with a lot of ego on this team. There's a lot of championships, a lot of all-star appearances, a lot of all-NBA guys all playing on one team. That is going to be a lot to manage. Obviously, I think some of these guys can kind of put that stuff to the side for the sake of the team, but that's a lot of egos. That's a lot of different ways of viewing basketball, all kind of happening at the same time. The other one was this weird LeBron play. It was about midway through the third quarter. I was surprised LeBron James was even in at that point. About midway through the third quarter, we saw Cameron Johnson try and posterize LeBron. LeBron defended it pretty well, but then Johnson went back on defense, and LeBron James just stood there for almost 15 to 20 seconds. Obviously, he probably thought that the Lakers were going to score quickly, but the Lakers were trying to run an offense. They got a rebound or 2 there, and LeBron was just sitting there with his hands on the hips. I think he said something to the Lakers bench. It was kind of concerning lack of effort. It almost reminded me of what happened between LeBron and the Lakers in last season's first round exit against Phoenix. This kind of lack of effort and this lack of hustle. It was a weird play. I don't think it's going to define LeBron's whole season, but it was a pretty weird play. Obviously, LeBron was a huge part in their almost comeback towards the end, so he hadn't just completely given up on the game. But anyways, I think the one thing that we really learned about the Lakers in this game is they have an incredibly high and a very low. During that third quarter, they were a bunch of bums playing 2K together. I just don't know how to explain it. It just did not look good. It was not good basketball while Phoenix was firing all cylinders. with a new team, with a lot of new guys. There's a lot for both guys like LeBron and Frank Vogel to really figure out. There's going to be a lot of things from egos to manage, changing up the offense, how to work with, Westbrook and his skill set. There's a lot that the Lakers are going to have to figure out for this season. But they also have an incredibly high. I had a feeling when there was even a 20-point deficit with like 8 minutes left that the Lakers were definitely putting something together, and they nearly did. Obviously they didn't, but it was pretty scary to watch, but it was also fun to watch. Westbrook and Anthony Davis, they were showing a good connection. LeBron was in there, Mel was in there hitting some big shots. This team, if everybody is playing as good as they look on paper, this is going to be a good team. This is going to be a top 3 team in the Western Conference. I don't think we're going to see that team consistently for a while. I think we're going to see these growing pains of how to play with Westbrook and Vogel, the things that I just said. We're going to see some Lakers growing pains, and it's probably going to take a month or two to really get to them full selves, maybe even the All-Star break, depending on how Westbrook does. They may have a little hole to climb out of, but eventually I think they're going to get up there to that top 3 seed, and I think they're going to be one of the best teams out there. As far as for Phoenix, they're definitely picking off where they were last year. A rough start against the Nuggets, but they're definitely showing that they're still that same team that we saw in the finals last season. Question to ask is that team enough to make a new finals appearance? We can't answer that question right now. Games like these make me think that they can, but games against the Nuggets say otherwise. Alright guys, that's it for this one. I'm Cheetos Man, I'm Flamin' Hot, and I'm out of here.